Hi, I'm James Naylor Green, professor of Brazilian history and culture, and the national co-coordinator of the U.S. Network for Democracy in Brazil. This program is supported by the Washington Brazil office and the Brazil Office Alliance. This is Brazil Unfiltered. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Marianna Poyares. She is the Fritz Fellow at Georgetown Center on Privacy and Technology. She's a critical theorist working on the ethics of new technologies of migration and border enforcement. Trained as a philosopher and with a background in human rights, policy, and advocacy, Mariana has worked, among others, with the Brazilian National Truth Commission, the United Nations Development Program, the International Rescue Committee, and the Zolberg Institute on Migration and Mobility. She has taught at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, the New School, and CUNY. She holds an MA in philosophy and in international relations and a PhD in philosophy. Mariana, welcome to Brazil Unfiltered.
Thank you so much for having me, James.
So, with the new presidency of Donald Trump, this issue, the issue of social media, fake news, misinformation, disinformation, and the advance of the extreme right in the United States and around the world is of utmost importance. So, first of all, how should we interpret Mark Zuckerberg's recent statements that show him aligning himself ideologically with the Trump administration and the concepts dear to the far right?
Yes, I think that it's an important question to ask. And I think that the most general way of interpreting what is happening, in some sense, it's like the theater is over for big tech. For a long time, Silicon Valley has presented itself as this world outside bureaucracy and almost kind of in a way and on the verge of capitalism, a land of pure innovation, creativity, where well-intentioned and forward-thinking nerds are riding their electric bikes and drinking matcha lattes, kind of like the nerdy grandchildren of the Berkeley hipsters, embedded somehow the same kind of communitarian spirit. I think that this theater is really falling to pieces. What we have is just, I mean, the truth coming out in the sense that big tech is an industry like any other industry, like oil, like mining, like banking. And it is a multi-billion-dollar industry. So the cool dudes on sneakers, they're not wearing suits, but they move around on helicopters, just like the dudes in suits. And they're not just millionaires, they are billionaires on their way to becoming trillionaires while going fairly untaxed and undersupervised. And this is only possible, and it's important to bring kind of like this economic landscape forward when talking about big tech. It's not only important, it's crucial, right? We have to understand this as an industry. And this huge hoarding of wealth is only possible because differently, even from oil and mining, big tech is essentially monopolistic. Google has a monopoly over search engines, Amazon over e-commerce, Apple over phones and computers, and Facebook or Meta, well, right? Meta has a monopoly over social media. So we have to stop romanticizing these companies and understand what their business plan is, right? And behind Facebook's very nice slogan of connecting people, what we have is a multi-billion-dollar company that did not become what it is by offering a free service of connecting people. The service is not free, right? It is a service that generates wealth, not only through advertisement, as we once thought it was the case, right? But ever since 2018, we have a very clear picture of how Facebook extracts its wealth and generates wealth. So in 2018, it's important to remember we had the Cambridge Analytica scandal. And we all know that since then, that Meta's true profit is coming from extracting our data by our, users' data, right? From our everyday interactions in the platform, everyday interactions with one another. They generate systems of behavioral modeling and prediction and they sell these systems to the highest bidder, right? So from a user's perspective, what you have is this nice platform where you can see your friend's baby and click and like that, or a video on how to do sourdough bread, and it's all very fun. But every time a user interacts with the platform or through the platform, they create value for Meta by adding nuance to a psychological profile, by honing a behavior prediction algorithm that is for sale. So we know, since the Cambridge Analytica scandal, again, I'd remind the listener that maybe forgot about the Cambridge Analytica scandal, right? The Cambridge Analytica scandal came when a whistleblower exposed how Facebook sold 50 million profiles to the consulting company Cambridge Analytica, who used the data to target undecided voters in the United States and to influence those voters to vote for Donald Trump. Right? They had a very specific political goal. And this was 2018. And right after that scandal, Zuckerberg was called to testify before Congress. He stuttered, he babbled, he got a slap on the wrist, right, in many ways. And now, 5 years later, he comes and announces Meta's alignment with the far right, right? So what he announced was the end of fact-checking in the US, ending DEI programs, calling for a more masculine energy, and redefining the concept of hate speech in the platform so that it no longer covers hate speech, right? So I think it's important to stop kind of tiptoeing around Meta's alignment with the right. The difference now, and it is an important difference, it is a significant difference that is happening now with the announcement, is that Meta leadership clearly now understands that there is no need to continue carrying out programs that are expensive programs, fact-checking programs, right? So there's no need to carry out these programs that sought to mitigate the spread of misinformation. We need to understand this as a strategic business decision that speaks to how Meta's leadership understands the immediate future under a Trump administration, but also how they understand the future beyond this administration. And this is very telling and concerning, I think.
So Zuckerberg stated when he made that pronouncement, I'm quoting him, "We're going to work with President Trump to push back on governments around the world going after American companies and pushing to censor more." And in making that comment, he was really indirectly mentioning Brazil's Supreme Court. What could he mean by pushback? How could he and the Trump administration work to that end? And I think we have to consider also Elon Musk's battle with Supreme Court Justice Alexandre de Moraes, who has been trying to control the misuse of the internet in this way. How do we understand all this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's important to highlight two elements of Zuckerberg's announcement and also like the different landscapes in Brazil and in the US, right? Considering how social media platforms are regulated. So let's first focus on the redrawing or the redefinition of hate speech. So now so-called hateful expressions towards minorities in general will no longer be considered hate speech on any Meta platform. So expressions such as all immigrants are thieves, they're completely fine and they're allowed to circulate. This decision takes effect immediately and it has a global impact, right? So it's immediately permissible to have these kind of statements in any Meta platform as of now. What happens in Brazil? In Brazil, the AGU, which is the Office of the Solicitor General, has made an announcement this week that this change in definition of hateful speech is at odds with the Brazilian legislation.
And the Brazilian Supreme Court and the
And
Constitution decision to declare racism, anti-racist comments as being hateful and criminal, as they also ruled on homophobia. Statements on homophobia were also considered criminal by analogy.
exactly, exactly. And for instance, homophobic comments, they are just raining wild on every single Meta platform. So the Solicitor General made this announcement this week and also announced that they will be launching an investigation on how this decision will unfold on Meta, on Facebook, on Brazilian platforms. And yes, if they like, I mean, there's a development, right? There is a timing to courts and federal investigations that we'll just have to sit and wait and see what Brazil's answer to this decision that, again, as I said, is already into effect, how that will unfold. But there's a second element to Zuckerberg's announcement that is important to highlight because there's a stark difference between how it operates in the US and in Brazil, which is the end of fact-checking. The announcement is that Facebook in the US will no longer be collaborating with independent fact-checking agencies, only in the US. This doesn't apply to Facebook or Meta or any other Meta services and platforms outside of the US. So let's remember that in the US, there's no regulation that requires social media to conduct fact-checking. In Brazil, there is, right? So fact-checking in the US was seen as a form of voluntary self-regulation. But in Brazil, as in the EU, Mexico, and other countries, fact-checking is part of a national regulatory framework for social media platforms. So much so, as you said very well, we can remember what just happened with X, right? If a platform it's considered to be non-compliant, it will be suspended. Its services will be suspended in Brazil. That is why Meta is not canceling their agreements with Brazilian fact checkers and Mexico reviews and so on and so forth. It only applies to the US because Facebook cannot make it happen without falling out of compliance in Brazil, at least not yet, right? Not yet. I think that what we can certainly expect from this movement is that Meta will be actively campaigning against fact-checking on a global level, right? And testing the limits of local legislation, testing the capacity of local courts and governments to answer to mass disinformation. We can expect that. But at this point, Meta is still in partnership with independent fact checkers in Brazil and in most of the globe.
You know, it's really interesting as a layperson on this topic. Every time someone on TV tries to use a certain word, they're not allowed to say that word because the Federal Communication Commission prohibits indecent words being spoken. But because, as I understand it, Facebook or any other social media is not considered true media. It's considered a platform. It's considered a vehicle for people to express. There's no regulation or no control. And which is, if you think about it, kind of insane. But why is the far right in Brazil so excited about Zuckerberg's position, or why are they so enthusiastic about this freedom that they're being granted to a certain extent? Can we understand that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, it's really astonishing how the Brazil's far right is so dependent or even subservient to the narratives of the US far right. It kind of imports a lot of discourses from the US far right. And one of the narratives that they hold very dear is this idea that curbing fake news is actually a tool for curbing freedom of speech or censorship and so on. And I think that is my understanding, right? That this is very much kind of a symptom of a kind of social sphere that came into being with social media platforms, right? I think that one of the most damaging effects socially of social media, I mean, they're wonderful effects, right? But one of the most damaging to democracy is the creation of echo chambers. I'll just say a couple words. So echo chamber is this idea that you are in a social media platform, that you are in a very tailored and controlled environment that presents itself as open and public, right? As if it's like an open square in the middle of town. It's not, right? Every single environment that we're in when we're in a social media platform, it's very tailored, it's very controlled. And these environments make it so that participants only encounter beliefs that reinforce and amplify their pre-existing beliefs. So the user has the impression that, say, the whole world agrees with them, when in fact it's not actually, they're not inhabiting the whole world, they're inhabiting, again, an echo chamber, right? But the user they're usually either exposed to none or very little dissent, and dissent is such a vital part of democracy, right? And even when a dissenting voice enters the echo chamber, it is just overwhelmed and silenced by a very emboldened majority. Even if this majority is very, as I was saying, controlled and local, it feels like it's everyone, right? What this means is that, in practical terms, what it means is that usually the social harm that is generated by fake news cannot be undone by disseminating the truth, at least not in the same speed and not in the same strength, right? So I will bring this example very quickly. The fake news about PIX. PIX, for those that don't know, is an online banking transfer tool that is for transferring money in Brazil through your phone, through online banking. It's quick. It hits the other person's banking account immediately. And it's very, very popular in Brazil, right? Very, very popular. Okay, that being said, different topic, but you will see that it's not. Well, the Brazilian IRS recently decided to create new regulations to avoid scams and fraud. And the far right in Brazil took up this opportunity and came up with this like absurd lie that actually the federal government would start taxing the PIX transactions. It's a lie. It wasn't even remotely part of the conversation. It had nothing to do with the anti-fraud bill, but it doesn't matter, right? The damage is done. There was such immense outrage against the anti-fraud regulations that the speed in which the government tried to counter the fake news with facts just wasn't quick enough politically. And now the IRS backed down and decided that they will not be rolling back they will not be rolling forward, right? They will not be installing these new regulations. So regulations that would be very good, would have a very healthy impact in protecting the public from fraud. But I mean, that's it. The damage is done. And this is what I mean when social media, especially unregulated social media, has this immense power for creating chaos and smoke screens and imaginary monsters. And it's with these imaginary monsters that the far right really, it's their favorite tool for, I would say, doing politics, but perhaps it would be more accurate to say not doing politics, or not allowing good politics to happen, right? Not allowing us to have the conversations that we should be having, taxing big fortunes, regulating social media, and so on and so forth, right? We're all occupied with these smoke screens all the time. I would just bring perhaps to the American public one example that I always think it's the most incredibly symptomatic example of fake news that could ever exist. During the Bolsonaro elections, there was this fake news about the nipple of the baby bottle was shaped as a penis, and somehow these bottles, these baby bottles, were being distributed by the Labor Party in public schools to children. I mean, it's the most ridiculous and symptomatic, like possible fake news, but it had an impact. It had a real political impact.
Mariana, when I was in Brazil, when this happened, it was during the campaign where Fernando Haddad in 1918 was running against Bolsonaro when Bolsonaro won. And I commented to people in Uber when I got an Uber ride, and they all believed it. I mean, I
Yeah,
kept on saying, "Are you crazy?" But they all really believed it. They thought it was true. And I couldn't convince a single American to believe that actually that had happened, that circulated.
absolutely.
People just said, no, that's not possible, that kind of craziness. But I think that's a very good example that I also use when I try to explain the situation. You raised something else, which I think is important, which is the way in which Zuckerberg is saying we need to make the internet more masculine or male friendly. And could you elaborate what's behind all that? This issue of men on the internet are somehow being prevented from expressing their feelings or their energy or their ideas. What's going on here with that argument by Zuckerberg?
I think that it has to do again with the echo chambers and um, the kind of toxic masculinity that rules these environments. And I think it's very important to highlight that when we're talking about toxic masculinity, we're talking about environments that are also potentially welcoming to women, right? I mean, they're not exclusive, like they're not ruled by gender. We could have a lot of women that are reinforcing these kind of stereotypes, these kind of narratives. And I mean, what happens is that we have these environments where everyone else is they're supporting kind of like a unified narrative, almost like a chorus, right? Where you have everyone in the environment, everyone in that space singing the same song together in a way, right? This is something that it has been studied over and over again by scholars that talk about extremism and the far right, and how these mechanisms of emboldening and supporting very narrow worldviews that are very exclusionary, that try actually also to put the blame for, say, rampant capitalism, right? The fact that the middle class has been experiencing in the past decades their conditions of life worsening and worsening every time more. And instead of looking at the actual culprits of what is happening worldwide with an immense concentration of health and wealth in the hands of so few, what we have is people pointing fingers and say to DII policies and saying, I don't have a job because a woman stole it from me, or a person of color stole it from me, or an immigrant stole it from me, and so on and so forth, right? Yeah, so it's very much kind of like this decaying atmosphere, social atmosphere.
So the Brazilian government is currently pushing a bill against fake news. So what does this bill entail as the Lula government? And what is your evaluation of the effectiveness of this possible legislation? Should it be passed by the Congress, which is a big question mark?
Yeah. I think I would like the bill is quite, first of all, it's important to say that this bill was drafted after a long period of time of consultations with actors from civil society. It has already reached a level of compromise with a different political spectrum. It's a very interesting bill, right? But I would like to place emphasis on perhaps the central aspect of the bill, which is the fact that the bill places the responsibility for creating oversight mechanisms against mass disinformation campaigns in the hands of the platforms. So that is, social media and messaging platforms would have to bear the responsibility of reporting illegal material instead of having courts doing this work. And this is very important because, again, one of the main issues with combating fake news on social media platforms is, as I was mentioning, the difference in timing, right? Once something hits the internet, yeah, of course, we can take it to court, but courts, there are institutions that have their own time frame that is completely different and almost at odds with the temporality of social media. So we would put this responsibility, this oversight responsibility on the hands of the platforms. And again, I'm not saying this is not what the bill is about user A sent a message to user B, and this is false information. That is not what is supposed to be regulated. It's about massively boosted content through paid advertisement, right? So failure to report illegal content would lead to heavy fines and even ultimately the suspension of the service. This schema is very similar to the accountability system that was created by the European Union recently. And can it be effective against fake news? It's certainly a substantial improvement. To bear the burden, the cost would no longer be in the hands of local courts. And it's very simple, right? That the platforms would be accountable for the content they advertise and massively distribute, and from which they generate immense profit. Fake news wouldn't completely disappear, obviously, right? But as a business, again, let's remember big tech is a business, right? There would be a considerable incentive against allowing and supporting the mass dissemination of fake news.
So I mentioned earlier Elon Musk and his romance with Donald Trump and his influence on the campaign and now in the presidency. We'll see how long that lasts. But Elon Musk has a tremendous grudge against Supreme Court Judge Alexandre de Moraes for his decisions to try to limit X and what was posted on X, including suspending it because it failed, as you mentioned, to comply with government court orders. So, what do you think Musk is up to at the end of the day?
I think that there are a number of elements, right? I think that Elon Musk will certainly try to exert some influence. I think he is, this is absolutely clear. He has a very narcissistic personality, and he certainly holds a grudge against Justice Alexandre de Moraes. But I think he will have a lot on his plate, at least initially with the new government. God knows how long his honeymoon with Trump will last, considering the two kind of very flamboyant personalities. But I think that he's a businessman, and I think he is interested, especially if you look, if you think about how he is viewing Brazil. I think it's not too far off to think that he's interested in Brazil is relying on two aspects. One, natural resources, especially mining. Let's not forget that this is Elon Musk's inheritance in many ways. Somehow Musk managed to rebrand himself as a self-made man, but he is the son of one of the largest mine owners in Africa, right? So mining is incredibly important, especially rare metals, etc., for his businesses. And bolstering the far right. I think he has a private, a personal commitment to bolstering the far right worldwide, not in Brazil. And let's also forget that differently from Zuckerberg or even Bezos, et cetera, he himself is a social media celebrity in a way, right? This personality is a super spreader of conspiracy theories. And I think that he will continue to use his social media presence to inflate whatever is the far right's agenda for the day.
Musk financed the Trump campaign, 200 million or plus. He has threatened to go against Republicans who are critical of Trump's positions and not voting with him in Congress. Do you think it's possible that he's been threatening to do that in Great Britain, where he wants to influence the election in Great Britain? Do you think it's possible that he'll start trying to finance local politicians and parties in Brazil in order to achieve his political goals?
I think that um, I think it's not, I mean, I think it's very likely that he will do so, especially when we're getting closer to the Brazilian presidential elections. I think that right now he's very much concerned with the UK and Germany, right? And trying to influence election outcomes in these two countries. There is, however, a difference in how donors can interact with political parties when you look at US regulations and Brazilian regulations. Brazil's rules for donations are much stricter than the American rules. So no individual, doesn't matter their nationality, but no individual can pour millions of dollars into someone's campaign in Brazil. But there are a number of backdoors, right? There are a
Right.
number of backdoors, and there are ways of courting certain individuals, as we saw, for instance, with Sergio Moro, who was very much courted back in the day. And Musk does seem to have an interest in advancing the far right, and he could find good partners in Brazil. If you look at Brazil's financial elite, or what we call the Faria Limers, which is a street in São Paulo where large part of the people that work for stock market, et cetera, where they work. Or even he could find very good allies in Brazil's far right, especially the BBB, we call it, the Bancada da Bíblia Boi Bala, which is almost like a caucus in Congress that includes conservative, evangelical, agribusiness, and pro-gun politicians. So he could find good allies in Brazil, unfortunately.
So, Mariana, what can we as academics, activists, and concerned citizens do to defend democratic institutions and traditions in face of these attacks from the far right through social media, through the campaigns that are being conducted today? What can we do?
I think that we learned a lot, James, and I think that especially in Brazil, we learned a lot in 2018. I think that we need to keep investing in networks of disarticulating misinformation, which is something that in Brazil we learned a lot, as I was saying, in the not the past elections, but the one before that, the one that Bolsonaro won. I think we need to be uh, especially vigilant and active, and we cannot just act when elections are nearing, right? We need to be constantly vigilant and active in these networks, trying to disarticulate these networks of massive disinformation. We need more robust legislation, as we were talking about, right? Like the fake news legislation that is very helpful. It's very helpful to take the burden out of local courts that have so much in their hands already. But I would really like to highlight that there's a small, like everyday kind of action that individuals and institutions can do, which is very and quite simple to kind of counter this massive disinformation avalanche that, for instance, will probably be coming through Facebook and Meta. Just choose platforms that have a commitment to fact checking, content moderation, and that do not sell content blasts to whomever is willing to pay. Choose platforms that don't put a price tag on democracy, right? They are available, they are out there, they're good platforms. Just move on, go to a different platform.
Marianne, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners today about this conversation?
I would like to emphasize a couple of points that I think are very important for us when we think about the relationship between big tech and our governments and democracy and how they operate. I think that first, it's incredibly important, as I mentioned, to stop infantilizing big tech, right? As I mentioned, these are billionaires on their way to becoming trillionaires, at the expense of our futures and our democracies. And by that, I mean that they go from actively lobbying against platform regulations, against oversight, against antitrust regulations, against labor rights, right? Like Amazon very famously has been fighting its workers against their right to unionizing in the United States and in other countries. Um, but these companies are also they also engage in immense consumption of natural resources, going from rare minerals to immense and usually free energy consumption for running data centers, for instance. So I think that we need really to have in mind the weight and how our current politics are being shaped by big tech. We should also look beyond the US for examples on how to effectively regulate social media, for instance, making sure that democratic controls prevail over the interest of oligarchs. And hopefully, Brazil can be a leader on this field. This is a hope that I know I share with many. And last but not least, I think that it's very important to not surrender as a society and in our communities to pessimism and nihilism. Yes, there is a lot we can do, from the individual choices I mentioned of like which platforms we use on a daily basis. And of course, even if it's not possible to completely leave some of the most, say, problematic platforms, we can at least be strategic about how much we use them, and how much we choose to use other platforms as well. And I think that it's also important to amplify the amazing work that so many civil society organizations out there are doing, and individuals as well. So, from fact checkers to accountability agencies, journalists, academics, policymakers, and so on. There's so much incredible work being done on how to democratize tech and create responsible info systems. I could mention, for instance, a recent report released by the Observatory on Information and Democracy that provides a roadmap to policymakers and civic leaders. And it's a great example, and it's one of many. So I think that it's very important for us to amplify the amazing work that so many are doing right now on the issue.
Mariana, I want to thank you so much for joining us today on Brazil Unfiltered.
Thank you so much for having me, James.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the interview. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like the video. And if you've not yet subscribed, please do so. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts, please leave us a 5-star review. It helps others find the program. Have a great week. Until next time, até a próxima.